Hi there, I'm a certified lawyer in the fictional state of panic, spelt like this. And I know my rights. But do you know yours? Because in the world of media, rights are everything. The right to a name, the right to a character, the right to claim your idea was yours even though everyone else swears they had it first, but it was your idea. It was your idea. But sometimes two parties claim that they own the rights to the same or similar thing. These disagreements usually stay behind closed doors, buried under contracts and quiet settlements, but sometimes they spill out into the open.
Peace up, A-Town.
Welcome to 2004. Facebook has just launched Everyone Needs a Nintendo DS and no one can get enough of Usher. And over in Italy, two magical girl series are taking the country by storm. One is Disney's Fantasy Guardian comic series W.I.T.C.H, and the other is Rainbow Studios' sparkly and stylish fairy cartoon Winx Club. And as much as fans are loving both of these shows, they're also noticing some similarities. In fact, some fans are claiming to notice a lot of similarities. For the better part of the last 2 decades, the Winx and W.I.T.C.H fandoms have been locked in a never-ending fandom beef, mainly stemming over the belief that Winx Club copied W.I.T.C.H. But in 2004, that possibility went from a matter of fan speculation to a matter of the law, when Disney officially sued Winx Club. The entertainment giant was determined to prove that Winx Club had infringed on their rights to W.I.T.C.H, and whilst one would think that a lawsuit backed by Disney would finally settle once and for all who really came first, at the end of the day it left the two fandoms just as divided as before, if not more. So, this is the story of when Mickey Mouse went into a courtroom to sue Winx Club, and how that case has continued to fuel the question, did Winx Club copy W.I.T.C.H? But before we go into the lawsuit, first we have to set the scene. On April 3rd of 2001, Disney Italy published the first issue of their newest comic book series, W.I.T.C.H. Created by Elizabeth Tognoni, Alessandra Barbucci, and Barbara Canepa, the series followed a group of young girls who discover they are mythical beings chosen to protect the center of the universe, known within the series lore as Guardians of the Veil. The group consisted of 5 friends: Will, Irma, Torani, Cornelia, and Haylin, whose initials formed the titular anagram and who were each connected to one of the elemental forces, including energy, water, fire, earth, and air respectively. Like most magical girl media, the comic explored how the 5 characters balanced their newfound power and responsibility with the everyday realities of being a teenager, with topics like friendships, crushes, school pressures, and personal insecurities all being touched on during the comic's impressive 139-issue 11-year run. And needless to say, audiences loved it. Upon its release, the W.I.T.C.H comic series was an immediate hit, selling millions of copies each month and quickly expanding into a global multimedia phenomenon, with tie-in novels, video games, and of course a wide variety of merchandise. It was even considered a sort of turning point in the European comic book industry, with the W.I.T.C.H name being recognized as one of the first comics primarily aimed at young girls to achieve major commercial success. So it didn't really come as a surprise to anyone when just over a year after the comics debuted, it was announced that SIP Animation would partner with Disney Channel to adapt the comics into an animated series. Production would begin on 52 half-hour episodes in spring of 2003, with the show premiering just over a year later on December 18th of 2004. What aired was a loose adaptation of the 12 Portals comic arc for the show's first season and Nerissa's revenge for its second, before the series quietly concluded with its 52nd episode on December 23rd, 2006. No official explanation was ever given as to why the show didn't continue past this point. In fact, for a lot of fans, the sudden end was kind of a shock. The show maintained consistently high ratings across Europe, even breaking some rating records in the US, and throughout its run it received decently positive reviews. Although it is worth noting that the adaptation did receive criticism from fans for straying from the source material and putting more emphasis on the male characters in an effort to appeal more to boys. But nonetheless, the show is now considered a cult classic, and the W.I.T.C.H brand is sort of going through a revival, with a reboot graphic novel releasing in 2023 and talks being held as recently as 2025 about a possible Disney Plus live-action adaptation. But at the height of its popularity in the early 2000s, the W.I.T.C.H name was a recognizable and beloved brand in Europe, and Disney knew that what they had was valuable and worth protecting. Especially considering at the time, the brand was one of the only hit franchises specifically targeted towards and truly capturing the attention of preteen girls in the West. At least, that was until W.I.T.C.H's chokehold on preteen girls was absolutely rocked on the 28th of January 2004 when a second Italian magical girl series hit the market. It was conceptualized in the late 1990s by Italian animator Eugenio Straffi, and after years of development, including a scrapped pilot and multiple titles and iterations, the show would finally premiere as the iconic and beloved Winx Club, a show that almost overnight would become one of the most popular entertainment exports Italy has ever produced. Within just a few years, Winx Club was airing in more than 130 countries, drawing millions of viewers for each new episode and turning the brand's merchandise into a billion-dollar industry. The Winx dolls were reportedly the third most popular doll line in the world at one point, and products like Winx stickers, magazines, and clothing broke records, becoming some of the most in-demand products within their markets. And that was just the commercial side. Culturally, one study found that Winx Club was the fourth most popular Italian series outside the country, and the Winx characters were often chosen as ambassadors to represent Italy abroad. The show's success even propelled Rainbow Studios onto the global map, drawing the attention of Nickelodeon's parent company Viacom, who in 2011 invested €62 million for a 30% stake in the company. Even today, more than 2 decades later, Winx Club is still very much alive, with 8 seasons, 3 movies, 2 spin-offs, a live-action adaptation, and a recently released CG reboot. But what was the show about? Winx Club followed the lives and adventures of a group of fairy friends as they attended the Althea School for Fairies, fought villains, and learnt more about themselves, each other, and their magical world. The titular Winx Club consisted of Bloom, the fairy of the dragon flame and basically the main character of the show, Stella, the fairy of the shining sun and moon, Flora, the fairy of nature, Musa, the fairy of music, Aisha, the fairy of wave/morphics, and my personal favorite character, Techna, the fairy of technology. Across the franchise, the Winx balance saving the magic dimension with their everyday life, including classes, friendships, and romance, all while growing from ordinary students into guardians of their home world. And then back to being students. It was a whole thing. But if you heard that description and thought some of those details sound a lot like Witch, you wouldn't be alone. Almost immediately after Winx Club premiered, fans of both franchises began drawing comparisons between the two. From the appearance of the characters to story elements and even the name itself, what began as playful debate amongst fans soon turned into genuine speculation about whether one franchise had influenced or even copied the other. And behind the scenes, tensions were rising too. Disney had invested a lot in Witch, and they were beginning to see Winx Club not just as potential competition, but as a potential threat. As the Winx got more popular, the comparisons grew louder, the tensions between the two franchises grew and grew until finally, the rivalry reached its boiling point. And Disney sued Winx Club. In April of 2004, the Walt Disney Company's Italian division filed a trademark infringement lawsuit against Rainbow Studios, claiming the latter production company had purposefully counterfeited the name Witch when creating the Winx. Disney framed the case as simple. Witch was such an incredibly strong and, quote, remarkably distinctive brand that when Rainbow Studios was creating Winx Club, they actively chose the name Winx in order to profit off Witch's success. Disney argued first and foremost that phonetically and graphically, the two trademarks were suspiciously similar. Both names opened with W-I and closed with a tight, sharp consonant cluster, and when written down, the words allegedly shared a sort of visual rhythm. Disney followed up by pointing out that the word Winx wasn't even a real word, and therefore had to have been invented specifically to look and sound like Witch. According to Disney, all of these similarities were an active attempt by Rainbow to blur the lines between the two franchises, and trick preteen girls into confusing Winx Club with Witch. Disney even stressed that because both franchises shared that young and impressionable audience, the risk of confusion was even greater, and therefore had to be judged more strictly. Essentially, Disney's case hinged on the idea that Witch was such a strong trademark that it was the responsibility of other companies to clearly differentiate their brands from it. And in the eyes of Disney, that was a responsibility that Rainbow failed to meet. Now, for any fans of either property who are familiar with this case, something about those arguments might sound off. There is seemingly no mention of Winx copying Witch's concept, story, characters, or anything like that. And that is because, contrary to popular belief, at no point in this lawsuit did Disney outright accuse Winx of copyright infringement or plagiarizing Witch. This is a common misconception, one that even I myself am guilty of believing and spreading, that presumably stems from mistranslations and the English Winx Club Wikipedia article stating it was a copyright infringement case. This is despite the fact that the very source it references is clear in that this was a trademark infringement case. But it's important to clarify that these two are not the same. I'm back, bitch. Copyright infringement is the unauthorized use or copying of material from an original creative work, such as characters, text, or visuals from an existing book, music, or film. For example, in the 1990s, representatives for David Bowie and Queen accused Vanilla Ice of copying the opening of their song Under Pressure for his song Ice Ice Baby. And in 1922, Bram Stoker's widow Florence Stoker sued the Nosferatu film, claiming it had adapted her late husband's book Dracula without permission. Trademark infringement, on the other hand, is the unauthorized use of a brand's distinctive identity, such as a logo, slogan, or name, in a way that could confuse consumers. For example, in 2013, Disney sued the film distribution company Phase 4 Films after they changed the name of a completely unrelated film to Frozen Land and created a logo that looked strikingly similar to Disney's hit Frozen, clearly in an attempt to cash in on the original film's popularity. I guess Disney just couldn't let it go. So all that to say that trademark infringement and copyright infringement are two very different matters. Sometimes they overlap and other times they don't, but in this case, Disney wasn't legally accusing Rainbow of stealing material from W.I.T.C.H. Rather, Disney was accusing Rainbow of using deceptive and dishonest methods, specifically mimicking the W.I.T.C.H name, in order to confuse viewers into thinking W.I.T.C.H and Winx were the same. And because of this, Disney effectively wanted Winx gone. Disney asked the court to rule that Rainbow had infringed on Disney's rights to the trademark Witch, and that therefore the Winx trademark was legally invalid, which would effectively cancel the Winx franchise. But why stop there? Disney also demanded that any and all material bearing the name Winx, including magazines, DVDs, and merchandise, all be seized and destroyed, and that the ruling in Disney's favour be publicised in Italy's biggest newspapers. Which says a lot about Disney's true motivations in this lawsuit if you ask me, but we'll come back to that. But of course, Rainbow wasn't just going to sit there and let that happen, so they came back swinging. Rainbow's counter-arguments were sharp and simple. First, the trademark for their hit franchise wasn't simply Winx, it was actually Winx Club, and likewise, Disney's trademark wasn't just Witch, it was actually Witch, Will, Irma Tarani, Cornelia Hay Lynn. Rainbow maintained that when you compared the two full trademarks, any possible phonetic or graphical similarities instantly disappeared. Furthermore, Rainbow pointed out that the two franchises' logos were visually very distinct. The Winx logo was written in italics, surrounded by semicircles, underlined, and the letter X was designed to appear as a pair of butterfly wings. Meanwhile, the Witch logo wasn't italic, the letters were broken up by the in-universe elemental symbols, and I mean, come on. Look at them. But finally, and possibly the most brutal to Disney's case, Rainbow argued that even if their trademark was just Winx and Disney's was just Witch just wasn't that strong of a trademark. Rainbow argued that Witch was a common fantasy word, and that even in Italy, where English isn't the country's official or primary language, audiences were aware of the word and its meaning. They also made a point to note that the Witch title was an acronym of the characters' names, so therefore, Witch should have actually been considered a suggestive trademark. That means the trademark only hints at the product, so the consumer kind of has to create their own connections. But simply put, if the trademark was suggestive, it was a weak trademark, and therefore, Rainbow and Winx Club just didn't know Disney shit. In short, Rainbow poked some serious holes in Disney's case. And with both sides standing firmly in their beliefs, the outcome would come down to how the courts weighed the arguments. The outcome could truly only be described as a slaughter. For Disney. On August 2nd of 2004, the Court of Bologna dismissed every claim Disney had made, ensuring that the Winx trademark would remain firmly in Rainbow's hands. In their decision-making, the court went point by point. First, they ruled that the two trademarks simply weren't confusing. The court agreed with Rainbow that the Witch trademark was actually Witch, Will, Irma Tarani, Cornelia Hay Lynn, and that the Winx trademark was actually Winx Club, which, when compared in full, were nothing alike. They also clarified, though, that even if the trademarks were the shortened versions suggested by Disney, they still wouldn't be confusingly similar. Next, the court agreed that Witch wasn't a strong trademark, due to the singular word being a generic fantasy term. Therefore, the court noted that due to the trademark's weak nature, even a small difference would be enough to set a brand apart from Witch, and in their eyes, Winx had done that. Thirdly, and most comfortingly, the court outright dismissed Disney's claim that young girls were incapable of differentiating between the two franchises, stating that when it came to their media choices, girls between the ages of 8 and 12 were far from oblivious. In fact, they were actually, quote, aware and selective. And finally, the nail in the coffin for Disney's case, the court found that even if the trademarks sounded similar, the two franchises' logos were different enough to completely separate the two. They noted that both trademarks' logos utilized the full names of the brands, and that each hinted at the nature of their media, with the X in Winx being representative of the character's wings, and the symbols and letter T in Witch reflecting the elemental symbols and a witch's hat respectively. In no uncertain terms, the court found no counterfeit can be recognized. Now seems like the time to mention that, in my opinion, it seems pretty obvious that this lawsuit was never made in good faith. Based on Disney's arguments as well as their demands, it seems like this is a case of Disney grasping at straws to try and find any legal avenue to snuff out what they recognized was competition. It's extremely telling, in my opinion, that this lawsuit took place just as Disney was preparing to launch the Witch animated series. If you ask me, Disney knew that if a young girl had to choose between watching an episode of Winx Club and watching an episode of Witch, most girls were going to choose Winx Club. So Disney Disney wanted to get rid of the competition. They wanted Winx gone, the remnants destroyed, and the name forever tarnished. Rainbow's supposed crimes forever solidified in Italy's biggest newspapers. All in an effort to ensure the witch show would succeed. Allegedly. But alas, Disney's sweeping demands were quickly struck down and Rainbow walked away victorious, with their legal fees paid by Disney and the Winx name free to continue growing into the cultural phenomenon it was. But of course, just because the court had spoken didn't mean the fan debating was over. Despite the legal ruling, fans continued to compare the two franchises, and to this day, one question remains a major factor in the ongoing fandom beef between Winx and Witch. So, did Winx Club copy Witch? It's important to note the context that, unfortunately, Rainbow Studios has a pretty extensive history of being accused of borrowing, copying, or outright stealing from other artists. In the late 2010s, the studio came under fire when fans noticed that a new character named Orion bore an uncanny resemblance to that of director Petra from the 2017 indie game Shardbound. Around the same time, official Winx artwork on the Winx shop was accused of lifting poses directly from independent illustrators. And even as recently as 2025, the Winx reboot has been credibly accused of using generative AI throughout its production, which, for those of you not in the know, is a technology that is only able to function due to its stealing from real artists. This context is why it's necessary to take the accusations of Winx copying Witch seriously and engage with the debate critically. So the first thing to look at is the timeline. It's well known that the Witch comics were released first, followed by the Winx Club show and then the Witch adaptation. But what is more important in this timeline is the creation of the two properties. Witch went into development in 1997, and Winx was conceptualized 2 years later in 1999, with the show's first and now lost test pilot Magic Bloom releasing in 2001, the same year Witch published its first comic. This pilot is necessary to note because from what is known and what footage is available, it is evident that story-wise, the DNA of what would later become Winx Club was already present before Witch was released. The magical girl premise, the teen drama, the characters' relationship, the school setting, and even some story beats. But aesthetically, the pilot looked very different from the Winx that would eventually air, which is where things get messy. A lot of fans point to the visual differences between the lost pilot and the final Winx show, specifically the diversity and appearance of the characters, as evidence of Witch's influence. In the original pilot, Musa and Flora were both white and had green and purple hair respectively, but in the final show, Musa is Asian with dark hair and Flora was Hispanic with brown hair. Straffi himself has said the decision to diversify the Winx cast was to broaden the show's appeal, but many suspect that once Witch was released and praised for its diverse set of characters, Rainbow pivoted to match that reception. Musa was supposedly redesigned to look more like Lin and Flora more like Irma. But in general, you'll often see people drawing direct comparisons between all the characters, including Bloom with Will, Stella with Cornelia, and Tirani with Aisha. At first glance, these comparisons are compelling, but realistically, most of these archetypes, such as the blonde fashionista, athletic black girl, and redhead lead, were already well-known tropes within girls' media. You'll find them in Bratz, Barbie, Totally Spies, even Strawberry Shortcake. One 2010 study on cultural diversity in children's television even criticized the fact that shows like Winx Club and Witch consistently link certain attributes with stereotypical appearances, which raised the question of how genuinely diverse the shows were. So in that sense, Winx wasn't really copying Witch as much as it was just copying everyone else. Furthermore, some fans have pointed out that in the case of Musa, she bears a closer resemblance to Yukari from Rainbow's own Tommy and Oscar than she does to Lin. So does that mean Rainbow was copying Rainbow? Beyond the characters, there is also the general concepts and aesthetics of the franchises. Both Winx Club and Witch fall into the magical girl genre, which, like any genre, comes with its tropes. Teenage girls balancing powers with ordinary life, transformation sequences, and battles against supernatural villains are not unique to Witch, nor were they invented by it. Both Winx and Witch's creators have openly discussed how they were inspired by the magical girl genre and series like Sailor Moon and Charmed, as well as a general desire to create empowering stories for young girls. So it can be confidently stated that these elements were not copied, they were just inevitable overlap. Aesthetically, the properties do have their similarities, but also their differences. Already discussed was the appearances of the characters, but when it comes to the franchise's art styles, the two were recognizably different. Winx Club leaned more into bright colors, feminine styling, and a fashion magazine look. Meanwhile, Witch appeared a lot more aesthetically in line with American media like Ben 10 and American Dragon Jake Long, with more muted colors, stylized shapes, and a rough around the edges vibe. Obviously, those shows came out after Witch, but I'm using them for the sake of comparison. The way the characters dressed in both properties was also notably different. The Witch characters' outfits were, overall at least, a lot more modest than the Winx, and were arguably based more in realism and relatability. Compare that to the Winx characters, who were very much dressed like, well, modern fairies. To say the two franchises looked exactly the same would, quite frankly, be inaccurate. But then there is the elephant in the room. The character sheets. During Winx Club's early development, a handful of sketches were made that take poses directly from witch stock art. Possibly the most damning are the sketches of Flora and Cornelia both interacting with a plant, and Bloom and Haylin surrounded by blue magic. The witch images were credited as being made in 1997, and the Winx ones in 1999, so Winx copied Witch. Case closed, right? Not exactly. It's well known that in the late 1990s, the Italian animation industry was tiny. Freelancers often jumped from project to project, and it's a fact that multiple artists worked on both Winx and Witch, including one of the Witch writers, Francesco Artibani. Artibani left Disney in 2004 to work on Winx as a writer and, at least according to him, help ensure Winx wasn't too similar to Witch. Moreover, at the time, it wasn't uncommon, and actually still isn't uncommon, for artists to use existing images as references when creating character sheets or developmental sketches. That kind of staff crossover and general industry practice makes it really difficult to distinguish what is copying, what is coincidence, and what is just regular industry recycling. What is harder to explain is that in the recent The Art of Winx book, a sketch was featured that looks extremely similar to the cover of Witch's book 15, The Courage to Choose. This book was released in 2005, meaning Winx was already an established brand by then. So it is definitely strange, if not outright suspicious, that a Winx sketch would so closely resemble a Witch image from when the two franchises were already up and running. The sketch isn't identical, but it's close enough to raise eyebrows. But finally, it wouldn't be fair to act like all of this affair was only accusations against Winx Club.
Oh, y'all wanted a twist, eh?
Later down the line in 2007, Witch was actually accused of copying Winx Club when the Witch characters would receive a power enhancement that granted them new outfits, much like what would happen to the Winx characters in every new season of the show. But the thing is, once again, this is a common trope in magical girl media. Winx didn't invent it, and Witch wasn't the first to repeat it. But it does go to show that the influence wasn't just one way. Witch and Winx were evolving alongside each other, and so naturally, bits and pieces bled across the divide. So, with all that said, did Winx Club copy Witch? The most honest answer is kind of, but probably not in the way most people frame it. It's almost certain that Winx was influenced by Witch to some extent, but the thing is, influence is not the same as plagiarism. As Mark Twain once wrote, there is no such thing as an original idea, and in media that is especially the case. Ideas bounce around, reappear in new forms, and blur into each other. So to outright say that yes, Winx copied Witch, or no it didn't, would simply be unreasonable, especially since none of us were in the rooms when these franchises were being made. It can confidently be said that Winx Club didn't set out to be a knockoff of Witch, but was it influenced by Witch? Possibly. In fact, probably. Actually, almost certainly. At the end of the day, both franchises were drawing from the same book of genre conventions, same cultural influences, and quite literally the same pool of talent. Which means that the truth of who copied who is a lot less clear-cut than either fandom would like it to be. In February of 2024, I posted a TikTok where I talked about this lawsuit. Don't look for it, you won't find it. It was one of my first TikTok videos to blow up, and at the time, I created videos in a very different way than I do now. Other than not scripting it and only doing very shallow research, I greatly exaggerated the way I discussed my feelings on the lawsuit. Partially because I was trying to be funny in my stupid sense of humor, and partially because I wanted the engagement. But when I filmed it, I was very much of the perspective that when it came to topics like if Winx copied Witch, I had to be on one team, and because I was on Team Winx, I had to hate Witch. Literally, I said I hated Witch. But since then, I've rewatched Witch for the first time since my childhood, and I've made this video, meaning I've done significantly more research on this topic. And I've come to the conclusion that I don't have to be on a side. Recognizing that both properties shared similarities and that they probably were piggybacking off each other in different ways has allowed me to enjoy both franchises a lot more for what they are. What's my point? Well, this has made me realize that a lot of the fandom beef between Winx Club and Witch is kind of unnecessary. Entire corners of the fandom internet have built their identities around picking a side, digging up this lawsuit like it's a smoking gun and using sketches and surface level similarities as ammunition to say that one show is inherently better than the other. But reducing two massively creative and influential franchises to a single legal spat from 2004 can overshadow what's most important. Both of these properties clearly meant and still mean a lot to the audiences that engage with them, and both allowed different groups of kids, especially girls, to feel empowered and represented, sometimes for the very first time. And if the way we engage with that legacy is by screaming copycat at each other across forums and TikTok, then maybe we're missing the point of what made those stories matter in the first place. People are absolutely entitled to believe that Winx copied Witch or that one franchise is better than the other, but really, I think we would all benefit from looking at the bigger picture here. Both franchises left their mark, so honestly, how amazing would it be if the two crossed over? Sorry if you heard my stomach growling.